Yes, yes.
Jai, ano mo?
Amazon Web Services powers transaksi yang lebih terpercaya, lebih banyak peluang untuk berkembang.
was all yellow. Your skin, oh yeah, your skin and bones turn into something beautiful. And you know I love you so. You know I love you so. I swam across, I jumped across for you. Oh, what a thing to do. 'Cause you were all yellow. I drew a line, I drew a line for you. Oh, what a thing to do. And it was all yellow. Your skin, oh yeah, your skin and bones turn into something beautiful. And you know, for you I bleed myself dry. For you I bleed myself dry.
Really give a damn about the way you touch me when we're alone. You can hold my hand if no one's home. Do you like it when I'm away?
If I wouldn't hurt my body, baby, would you love me the same?
I can feel all my bones coming back and I'm craving motion. Mama never really learned how to live by herself. It's a curse and it's growing. You're a pond and I'm an ocean. Oh, all my emotions feel like explosions when you are around. And I found a way to kill the sound. Oh, baby, I am a wreck when I'm without you. I need you here to stay. I broke all my bones that day I found you. Crying at the lake. Was it something I said to make you feel like you're a burden? Oh, and if I could take it all back, I swear that I would pull you from the tide. Oh, whoa, 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 I said no. I said no. Listen close, it's a no. The wind is a pounding on my back, and I found hope in a heart attack. Oh, at last, it is past. Now I've got it, and you can't have it. Baby, I am a wreck when I'm without you. I need you here to stay. I broke all my bones that day I found you. Crying at the lake. Was it something I said to make you feel like you're a burden? Oh, and if I could take it all back, I swear that I would pull you from the top. Darling, when I'm fast asleep, I've seen this person watching me saying, is it worth it? Is it worth it? Tell me, is it worth it? Is there something and there's nothing, there's nothing in between, and in my eyes there is a tiny dancer watching over me. He's singing, she's a lady, and I am just a boy. He's singing, she's a lady. Take it slow, tell me all how you've grown just for me. Could we all reminisce? Better yet, here's a pen, make a list, fill it full of all the things I've missed. Cause I can barely drive past the school without stopping to think of you and how we used to act the fool. But worst of all, I wish I called at least 1,000 times or more just to hear what I've been missing. If a picture is all that I have, I can picture the times that we won't get back. If I picture it now, it don't seem so bad. Either way, I still wish you were here. Don't say everything's meant to be, 'cause you know it's not what I believe. Can't help but think that it should have been me. Either way, I still wish you were here. Thinking back on the days where we all used to say, I know anywhere's better than here. In the back of the class where we grew up too fast, living life like there's nothing to fear. But the ice on the road, driving home all alone, singing along to a song from 3 summers ago. The one that made you remember it. Now I'll always remember it as the song that your life ended with. If a picture is all that I have, I can picture the times that we won't get back. If I picture it now, it don't seem so bad. Either way, I still wish you were here. Don't say everything's meant to be, 'cause you know it's not what I believe. Can't help but think that it should have been me. Either way, I still wish you were here. And they say you're in a better place, but a better place is right here with me. Yeah, they say you're in a better place. Too bad it's not what I believe. 'Cause a picture is all that I have to remind me that you're never coming back. If I picture it now, it just makes me sad. And right now, I just wish you were here. Don't say everything's meant to be,
sesuai dengan ketentuan yang
Cause
diberikan.
you know
Terima
it's
kasih.
not what I believe. Can't help but think.
Permisi untuk para peserta semuanya, dimohon untuk mengubah format namanya sesuai dengan ketentuan yang sudah ditentukan oleh para panitia. Terima kasih atas perhatiannya.
That it should have been me. In the end, I just wish you were here. Yeah, they say you're a better place. They say you're a better place. Either way, I still wish you were here. They say you're a better place. In the end, I just wish you were here.
Sikat gigi dengan sudut tepat bisa
All my friends are heathens, take it slow. Wait for them to ask you who you know. Please don't make any sudden moves. You don't know the half of the abuse. All my friends are heathens, take it slow. Wait for them to ask you who you know. Please don't make any sudden moves. You don't know the half of the abuse. Welcome to the room of people who have rooms of people that they love one day docked away. Just because we check the guns at the door doesn't mean our brains will change from hand grenades. You laughing on the psychopath sitting next to you. You laughing on the murderer sitting next to you. You think I'd get here sitting next to you. But after all I've said, please don't forget. All my friends are heathens, take it slow. Wait for them to ask you who you know. Please don't make any sudden moves. You don't know the half of the abuse. We don't deal with outsiders very well. They say newcomers have a certain smell. Yeah, trust issues not to mention. They say they can smell your intentions. You laughing on the freak show sitting next to you. You laugh some weird people sitting next to you. You think I did not get here sitting next to you. But after all I've said, please don't forget. All my friends are heathens, take it slow. Wait for them to ask you who you know. Please don't make any sudden moves. You don't know the half of the abuse. All my friends are heathens, take it slow. Wait for them to ask you who you know. Please, all my friends are heathens, take it slow. Wait for them to ask you who you know. Why'd you come? You knew you should have stayed. I tried to warn you just to stay away. And now they're outside ready to bust. It looks like you might be one of us.
I heard you say. At least not today.
Aku mau setiap bidang.
The birds have left the trees. The light pours onto me. I could feel you lying there all on your own. We got here the hard way. All those words that we exchange. Is it any wonder things can go? 'Cause in my heart and in my head, I'll never take back the things I said. So high and bold, I feel it coming down. She said, in my heart and in my head, tell me why this has to end. Oh no, oh no, I can't save us. My Atlantis we fall. We build this town on shaky ground. I can't save us. My Atlantis, oh no. We build it up to pull it down. Now all the birds have fled. The hurt just leaves me scared, losing everything I've ever known. It's all become too much. Maybe I'm not built for love. If I knew that I could reach you, I would go. It's in my heart and in my head. You can't take back the things you said. So high above, I feel it coming down. She said, in my heart and in my head, tell me why this has to end. Oh no, oh no, I can't save us. My Atlantis we fall. We build this town on shaky ground. I can't save us. My Atlantis, oh no. We build it up to pull it down. Yeah, we build it up and we build it up. Yeah, we build it up to pull it down. And we build it up and we build it up. And we build it up to pull it down. I can't save us. My Atlantis we fall. We build this town on shaky ground. I can't save us. My Atlantis, oh no. We build it up to pull it down.
Super 8.
I'm worse than what I do best. To fall this gift I feel blessed. A little through. It's always been, always will until the end. When the lights out, it's just dangerous. You ain't on now. Entertain us. I'm just stupid and contagious. You ain't on now. Entertain us. I'm a lotto. I'm a rhino. I'm a skater. I'm a beater. Yeah. Hey. Yeah. And I forget just what it is. So yeah, it makes me smile. I found it hard. It's hard to find. Well, whatever, never When the lights out, it's just dangerous. You ain't on now. Entertain us. I'm just stupid and contagious. You ain't on now. Entertain us. I'm a lotto. I'm a rhino. I'm a skater. I'm a beater. I deny you. 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 I deny you.
Meeting dimajuin dari
Perjalanan membawamu bertemu denganku, ku bertemu kamu. Sepertimu yang ku cari, konon aku juga seperti yang kau cari. Ku kira kita asam dan garam, dan kita bertemu di belanga. Kisah yang ternyata tak seindah itu. Ku kira kita akan bersama, begitu banyak yang sama, latarmu dan latarku. Ku kira takkan ada kendala, kukira ini kan mudah kalau aku jadi kita. Kasih sayangmu membekas, redam kini sudah pijar istimewa. Entah apa maksud dunia, tentang ujung cerita kita tak bersama. Semoga rindu ini menghilang, konon katanya waktu sembuhkan. Akan adakah lagi yang sepertimu? Kukira kita akan bersama, begitu banyak yang sama, latarmu dan latarku. Kukira takkan ada kendala, kukira ini kan mudah kalau aku jadi kita. Kau melanjutkan perjalananmu, ku melanjutkan perjalananku.
I remember the day, even wrote down the date that I fell for you. Now it's crossed out in red, but I still can't forget if I wanted to. And it drives me insane, think I'm hearing your name everywhere I go. But it's all in my head, it's just all in my head. But you won't see me break, call you up in 3 days, or send you a bouquet saying it's a mistake. Drink my troubles away, one more glass of champagne, and you know I'm the first to say that I'm not perfect, and you're the first to say you want the best thing. But now I know a perfect way to let you go. Give my last hello, hope it's worth it. Here's your perfect. My best was just fine. How I tried to be great for you. I'm flawed by design, and you love to remind me no matter what I do. But you won't see me break, call you up in 3 days, or send you a bouquet saying it's a mistake. Drink my troubles away, one more glass of champagne, and you know I'm the first to say that I'm not perfect, and you're the first to say you want the best thing. But now I know a perfect way to let you go. Give my last hello, hope it's worth it. I'm the first to say that I'm not perfect, and you're the first to say you want the best things. But now I know a perfect way to let you go. Give my last hello, hope it's worth it. See, but now I know a perfect way to let you go. Give my last hello, hope it's worth it. Here's your perfect.
I could say I never dare to think about you in that way, but I would be lying. And I pretend I'm happy for you when you find some dude to take home. But I won't deny that in the midst of the crowds and the shapes in the clouds, I don't see nobody but you. In my rose-tinted dreams, wrinkled silk on my sheets. I don't see nobody but you. Boy, you got me hooked onto something. Who could say that they saw us coming? Tell me, do you feel the love? Spend a summer or a lifetime with me. Let me take you to the place of your dreams. Tell me, do you feel the love? I could say I never unzipped those blue Levi's inside my head, but that's far from the truth. Don't know what's come over me. It seems like yesterday when I said we'll be friends forever. Heard constellations of stars, mules on city walls. I don't see nobody but you. You're my vice, you're my muse, you're a 19th floor view. I don't see nobody but you. Boy, you got me hooked onto something. Who could say that they saw us coming? Tell me, do you feel that love? Spend a summer or a lifetime with me. Let me take you to the place of your dreams. Tell me, do you feel that love? Boy, you got me hooked onto something. Who could say that they saw us coming? Tell me, do you feel that love? Spend a summer or a lifetime with me. Let me take you to the place of your dreams. Tell me, do you feel that love? Do you feel the 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 love?
I know you're somewhere out there, somewhere far away. I want you back. I want you back.
Halo?
My neighbors think I'm crazy, but they don't understand. You're all I had. You're all I had.
Kok nyanyinya ini Pak?
At night when the stars light up my room, I sit by myself, talking to the moon, trying to get to you. In hopes you're on the other side, talking to me too. Or am I a fool who sits alone, talking to the moon? I'm feeling like I'm famous, the talk of the town. They say I've gone mad, yeah, I've gone mad. But they don't know what I know, 'cause when the sun goes down, someone's talking back. Yeah, they're talking back. Oh, at night when the stars light up my room, I sit by myself, know you're somewhere out there, somewhere far away.
Don't go tonight. Stay here one more time. Remind me what it's like. And let's fall in love one more time. I need you now by my side. It tears me up when you turn me down. I'm begging, please, just stick around. I'm sorry, don't leave me. I want you here with me. I know that your love is gone. I can't breathe, I'm so weak. I know this isn't easy. Don't tell me that your love is gone, that your love is gone. Don't tell me that your love is gone, that your love is gone. I'm sorry, don't leave me. I want you here.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
May God bless us.
Waalaikumsalam.
Nama budaya, greetings of virtue. Good morning, all. How are you today? Hopefully, those who
Morning.
have attended
How about you?
the event this
Fine,
morning
thank
are in
you.
healthy condition. Amin. Welcome to Dr. Muhammad Iskandar Shah Rashid and Dr. Ahmad Faruk Aishan as the speaker in the international webinar. Good morning. How are you today? Hopefully, who have attended the event this morning are in healthy condition. Amin. Welcome to Dr. Muhammad Iskandar Shah Rashid and Dr. Ahmad Faruk Aishan as the speaker in the international webinar this morning. With them, the role of the G20 Presidency for Economic Growth and Sustainable Development. And welcome to Mrs. Nur Latifah, SAMA, as the head of the Economic Study Program, who has taken the time to attend this morning event. And of course, welcome to all of the participants I'm proud of. Ladies and gentlemen, we know that recovery together, recovery stronger is the important message in the G20 forum that was carried and presented by Indonesia in the World Financial Leaders Meeting, where Indonesia be the presidency of meeting this year. This message was taken because of the interval of COVID-19 pandemic hitting the global economic circumstances. But now, the economic recovery started to appear, and optimistic economic recovery should be ignited and must be the spirit of the presidency of Indonesia in the G20 this year. And Indonesia, as the holder of the G20 presidency, will be the host of KTT G20. This should not be wasted by Indonesia because on the occasion as the G20 presidency, Indonesia has a significant role in leading the discussion of global economic recovery once and for all. In this international webinar, we will both know and understand how the G20 presidency actually plays a role in economic growth and sustainable development. All right, before I read the schedule of event this morning, please allow me to read the rules of the international webinar first, so that our event will be conducted in orderly. First, the participants must fill out the registration form before entering the session. Second, the webinar will be held at 8:10. Third, Zoom access will be opened 30 minutes before the webinar. 5, the participants must be joined before the webinar begins. The late tolerance is 15 minutes late. 5, the link will be shared by the committee through the WhatsApp group. 6, the participants must turn their camera on during the webinar. The participants must use the virtual background that has been shared by the committee. If there's any problems occur, please kindly contact the committee. 7, the participants must wear the proper outfits. 8, the participants must turn their microphone off during webinar. 9. The participants were allowed to turn their microphone on only in the Q&A session. 10. The participants must change their display name using format below: full name, underscore, from, region, / instance, / school. 11. The participants expect to be orderly following the obligation until the end of the webinar. And the last, if there's any problems, please kindly contact the commit / the admin of WhatsApp group. For the next session, I will read the schedule of event this morning. First, opening. Second, singing Indonesia National Anthem, Indonesia Raya. Third, welcoming speech and greetings. Fourth, main event. 5, question and answer session. And the last, closing. Okay, the next event is singing Indonesia Raya. Thank you. For the next event, which is the first greeting for our event this morning, to Muhammad Uday Hasibuan, as Chief Executive, time is yours.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Excellency, Mrs. Nurul Latifah, SAMA, the Head Economic Study Program, respectable Professor Dr. Muhammad Iskandar Shah Muhammad Rashid, Associate Professor at the College of Islamic Studies, HBKU Qatar Foundation, and Dr. Ahmed Faruk Aisan, Professor at HBKU and the Program Coordinator of Islamic Finance and Economic. Honorable Agil Surya Rahmanto, Chairman of the Student Association of Economics, and my friends whom I love and I respect. First of all, let's pray and thanks into our God Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, who has been giving us some mercies and blessings so we can attend and gather in this place on good condition and happy situation. Secondly, may peace and salutation always be given to our Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, who has guided us from the darkness to the brightness, from the stupidity to the cleverness, from Jahiliyah era to the Islamiyah era, namely Islamic religion that we love. So, by his guidance, we are able to differentiate the good thing and the bad one, the right way and wrong one, in order to enter God's paradise. Thirdly, I don't forget to say thank you so much to the mistress of ceremony, Najma Amalia, who has been giving me time to speak in front of you all. The ladies and gentlemen, I also want to express my gratitude to the organizers who have put all their efforts and abilities in preparing this event so that it can be carried out properly and without any obstacles. While working together, of course, there are obstacles and shortcomings from this event that has been held. Therefore, I hope that the hearts of the attendants are willing to forgive if there are any shortcomings from the event that we are attending together. That all my speech. I do hope that my speech will be useful and I will live in this world. And hereafter the last I say. Allahumma fiqh wa mitorik. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you to Muhammad Uday Hasibuan. Next, the speech will be delivered by Ahmad Agil Surya Rahmanto as Chairman of the Student Association of Economic Study Program. For Ahmad Agil Surya Rahmanto, time is yours.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Excellency Mrs. Nur Latifah, SINI, the Head Economic Study Program, Respectable Professor Dr. Muhammad Iskandar Shah Muhammad Rasid, Associate Professor at the College of Islamic Study, and Dr. Ahmad Farooq Aishan, Professor at HIBQ and the Program Coordinator of Islamic Finance and Economy. Honorable members whom I love and I respect. First of all, let's pray and thanks unto our God Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, who has been giving us some mercies and blessings, so we can attend and gather in this place on good condition and happy station. Secondly, we pitch our salutation always given to our Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, who has guided us from the practice to the practice, from the stupidity era to the Jahiliyah era. Secondly, my pitch and salutation also be given to our Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, who has guided us from the darkness to the brightness, from the stupidity to the cleverness, from the Jahiliyah era to the Islamic era, namely Islamic religion that we love. Thirdly, I don't forget to say thanks so much to the Miss of Ceremony, who has been giving me time to speak up in front of you all. Dear ladies and gentlemen, introduction myself. My name is Adanya, Secretary of the Student Association of Economic Science. As a representative of the committee members, I would also like to welcome all of you who have taken the time to join us here. This event is one of the good opportunities that we can use to be able to introduce what it is like to work and about what the organization that we have been fostering and maintaining with all our heart for a long time. That's all my speech. I do hope that my speech will be useful in our life in this world and hereafter. As I say, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you to Robiatu Adawiyah. And for the last speech and as opening for international webinar is from Mrs. Nurul Latifah, SAMA, as the head of the Economic Study Program, State Islamic University, Sunan, Ampel, Surabaya. To Mrs. Nurul Latifah, SAMA, time is yours.
Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Alhamdulillah wa syukurillah wa la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. Allahumma shalli ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Good morning, greeting to all of Honorable Dr. Muhammad Iskandar Shah Muhammad, Associate Dean Academic at the College of Islamic Studies, HBKU Qatar Foundation, Honorable Dr. Ahmad Farouk Aisan, Professor at HBKU and the Program Coordinator of Islamic Finance and Economy. Happy participant. Praise be to Allah SWT who has given His grace, Taufiq and Inayah, so that today we can attend the 2022 International Webinar, The Role of the G20 President for Economic Growth and Sustainable Development in Health Condition. We would like to thank the Student Association of the Economic Study Program at the State Islamic University of Sunan Ampel for organizing this webinar. The webinar with the theme, The Role of the G20 President of Economic Growth and Sustainable Development, hopefully can last as well as possible until it's finished. Happy guys, we all know the G20 is multilateral cooperation from in 1999 at the initiation of the G7 members. The G20 involves developed and developing countries to jointly overcome the crisis. The role of the G20 is handling the global financial crisis, contribution in handling the COVID-19 pandemic, other international issues, including trade, climate, and development. Indonesia will hold the G20 president in 2022 with the theme Recover Together, Recover Stronger. Throughout this time, Indonesia wants to invite the whole world to work hard in hand, support each other to recover together and grow stronger and more sustainable. Therefore, we welcome the Student Association of the Economic Study Program Sunan Ampel State Islamic University to take part in organizing an international webinar with the theme, The Role of the G20 President of Economic Growth and Sustainable Development. We really appreciated the time taken. This is given the importance of the G20 for the growth and development of the world economy, especially after the COVID-19 pandemic. Happy guys, we hope that the international webinar can be a medium for transferring knowledge to participants, academic, and students in the economic field as well as the public about understanding the history and current economic condition, especially in Indonesia as preparation for facing challenge in the future. Not to forget, this webinar can add scientific insight for students in the field of economics and well as the public about understanding the G20 and prepare for future events through this webinar. Happy guys, happy conference, and hopefully this is all our contribution to society, and we are all always in the pleasure of Allah SWT. Thank you. Okay, the international webinar is open. Billahi taufiq wal hidayah, wallahu muwaffiq ila aqwamit thoriq. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you to Mrs. Nurul Latifah, SAMA. Well, I won't take any longer because we are at the main event this morning. But before that, I'll read our moderator's CV in this morning event. Name is Najma Malia. Address Street Asasia 2, Asasia Cluster, BB 36, Sumarakan, Bekasi, Bekasi City, West Java 17,143. Phone number is 081 574 276 185. Education 2020. Reason undergraduate, President University Law, International Law, GPA 388. Language, Indonesia, English, French, Spanish. and Japanese. Community experience. First, as Vice Project Manager in 101 legal course, introducing it to contract drafting. Second, as the event organizer in Legal Expo 2021. Third, as the person manager in Legal Debat Championship 2021. Achievement and certificate. As a pick and moderator of VGD in Puluk, President University International Law Club with Ibnu Hadi, Indonesian Ambassador to Vietnam 2016 until 2020 as the guest speaker. Founder of @halohukum.id, verbal communication in IMUN, International Model United Nations 2020, guest speaker in Layak Bahagia 2020, Mpo Etnis 2018, Putri Kartini 2019, and the last in participating at Model United Nations MUN Conference in Sekolah Victory Plus 2019. All right, that's a view from Mrs. Najima Amalia. And now we're at the main event, and I give the place and time to Mrs. Najima Amalia as the moderator of today's international webinar. For Mrs. Najima Amalia, time is yours.
Thank you, Sabita, as the MC. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Om Swastiastu, Shalom, Namo Buddhaya, dan salam kebajikan. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, Ibu Nurul Latifah, SIMA, as the head of study program lecturers, our distinguished speakers, Dr. Muhammad Iskandar Shahmul Rasid and Dr. Ahmed Farouk Aisan, as well as respected audience and my fellow friends. Please allow me to introduce myself properly again. Hello, my name is Najma Amalia K, and I'm law major in President University, and today I will be your moderator throughout this exciting webinar. I would like to welcome and thank you for everyone's presence in this Economic International webinar with the topic of the role of the G20 Presidency for Economic Growth and Sustainable Development. Indonesia has been a member of the G20 since the Intergovernmental Forum was formed in 1999. And Indonesia's participation as a Muslim majority nation and embraces the G20's image, especially in light of unfavorable assumption about the idea that Western and Islamic cultures conflict. If we can seize chances and overcome obstacles with the greatest advantage for Indonesia's interests, Indonesia's election as the G20 presidency will have strategic significance for economic recovery and the realization of a more advanced Indonesia. The G20 presidency is an arena for Indonesia to prove that the international community still has a good perception of Indonesia's economic resilience to the pandemic crisis. Therefore, the momentum of the presidency, which only occurs once per generation, approximately every 20 years, must be utilized as well as possible to provide added value to Indonesia recovery, both in terms of economic activity as well as domestic and international public confidence. Therefore, the objective of today's webinar is to make the public understand the situation of the global economy in light of Indonesia hosting the G20, understanding the G20's contribution to sustainable economic development and economic growth, understanding how the COVID-19 epidemic may affect economic recovery. Well, I hope this webinar will give all of the participants a new knowledge about what is G20 and can participate actively in succeeding G20 this year. Because on December 1, 2022, Indonesia will be host of the G20 event with the theme Recovery Together, Recovery Stronger. Now, in this webinar, we will have two presentations from two admirable guest speakers. The first presentation will be presented by Dr. Muhammad Iskandar Shahmul Rasid. Good morning, Mr. Muhammad. Are you there? All right, while waiting for him, Please let me read his CV. So, Dr. Muhammad Iskandar is currently an associate professor at the College of Islamic Studies, HBKU Qatar Foundation, and he holds a PhD in finance from the University of Nottingham, United Kingdom. He also has a Master in International Economic and Finance from the University of Queensland, Australia, and a Bachelor in Business Administration and Finance from International Islamic University, Malaysia. Before joining HBKU, Dr. Iskandar was an associate professor and associate dean of the School of Graduate and Professional Studies at the International Center for Education in Islamic Finance, a postgraduate university specializing in Islamic finance established by Bank Tenggara, Malaysia. He was also an assistant professor at the Department of Finance, Kuliah of Economics and Management Sciences. During his doctoral studies, he worked as a tutor at the University of Nottingham and a lecturer at Nottingham Trent International College, United Kingdom. Before the current position, he was also the Dean of School of Graduate Studies, Deputy Director of BNP Paribas Center of Islamic Asset and Wealth Management, and Treasurer of Malaysian Finance Association. Dr. Iskandar was a financial sector specialist, consultant for World Bank, and advisor for Brunei Institute of Real Leadership and Islamic Finance in Brunei, and he was involved in several consultancy projects with government agencies and financial institutions such as Ministry of Energy, Malaysia, Afghanistan's Ministry of Finance, CIMB Islamic Bank, and Responsible Finance Institute, and last, Enzico Sharia Advisory. All right. Good morning, Mr. Muhammad. Good morning, Dr. Muhammad.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
Not too bad. Yeah, it's early in the morning here, but alhamdulillah. Yeah.
Glad to hear that. Are you ready to present your presentation?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. No
All right.
worries.
The floor is yours, Dr. Iskandar.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Can you allow me to share my screen? Yeah. The organizer, can you allow me to share my screen? I can't, or unless you want to control my slides. Anyone? I'm not able to share my screen. Okay. All right. Someone is sharing my screen. Okay. Thank you. All right. Okay. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, everyone. Also, salam from Doha. I think today both of our speakers are from the same institutions. My colleagues, Professor Aisan, will speak after me. First of all, I just want to thank you for this opportunity and also for your kind introductions. It's always a pleasure to share knowledge and also talk about policies, especially taking into consideration the role of Indonesia, as the leader at this point of time for the G20 presidency. I think this year is very important for Indonesia. In fact, for the last few years, Indonesia has been playing a very big role as far, driving certain policies, voicing out the needs of emerging countries, including Malaysia and other Muslim countries as well. So forum like this, especially sharing this with the students, will provide some kind of guidance in terms of what should be done for the next 5 to 10 years. We don't want to talk so much far ahead because probably you're all aware that the fact that the world is changing so fast for many reasons. We are having a lot of technological disruptions. Technology become very powerful. As technology become powerful, our life also change quite rapidly as well. So the risk of technology, even though it provides a lot of upside, but it's also creating a lot of disruption in terms of our behavior. So as far that we can plan 5, 10 years and eventually building up our nation from there, I think that would be a good starting point. So that is second. We also talking about a big issue when it comes to climate change. So they're also providing quite a lot of disruptions as well. So that's another issue that we need to talk about today as well. And then the third one, which is probably the most important thing, is that the gap between the have and also the have-nots. So that is also a big issue, or we're talking about inequality, inclusion, so on and so forth. So today in my presentation, I'm not sure how long I have, Miss Moderator Najwa, how long I have? About 20-30 minutes? How long is my presentation?
I think it's about 30 minutes, sir.
Okay. So, all right. So let me just go through some of my thoughts within these 30 minutes. So inshallah that, we all can learn from each other. And after this, my colleague, Professor Aisan, will be speaking something similar, but more slightly in a different context. So you can probably get a bit more holistic view about, not just about role of Indonesia, but more importantly, the role of Islamic finance too. Can we move to the next slide? Okay, next slide, please. Thank you. All right. So a quick overview about what G20 is all about. I think you're probably aware about why they started this particular group. So I think it's very important for you all to understand is that G20 is basically another establishment by very powerful economies in the world. It started with G7, and then the Russian joined and become G8, and then eventually become G20. So the discussion of G20, maybe the other participants have to probably mute their computer so that it will not cause disruption when I speak. Okay. All right. Okay. So this is all the fun part of doing webinars online. Okay. All right. So let me just continue. Probably you need to understand why G20 is actually quite powerful. The first fact is that, this G20 produce almost 80% of the GDP. So they apply the rule that, generally in any organization, 20% will actually will produce 80% of the work. So the same thing apply here as well. These top 220 countries are basically producing 80% of the world GDP. So their voice, even though G20 is not a formal establishment as far like United Nations or legal establishment like United Nations or even IMF are concerned, but G20 carries a very powerful voice in terms of setting up the rules of, economics policy. So when I talk about the rules of economic policy, I think policies are driven in terms of how to drive the economy forward, how to make it more inclusive, and how to exactly learn in terms of all the disruption that I mentioned just now. So, I mean, historical perspective, it started after the Asian financial crisis, and then it became a bit more relevant after 2008 financial crisis. So in other words, is that the voice of the finance minister and also the presidency is always about shaping in terms of the future direction of the financial architecture. All right. And when you talk about financial architecture, the future direction is always in terms of how to facilitate the trade, for example. I think that's the most important thing, because these are the people who are actually producing a lot, and they need to basically have a system that support the growth of the economic activity, especially through trade. And then policies in terms of making financial system more stable, far more resilient, and try to minimize the systemic shock of the banking sector and capital markets, so on and so forth. So even though G20 is not really as structured or formalized at United Nations or IMF, but because they are dominated by very powerful entities, including, for example, the one that represent the Muslim world, Turkey, Indonesia, and also Saudi Arabia. So they simply are carrying out the voice of the big players. Okay, and then these big players are also very important, and because that's how the world has been structured. For example, if you come to Malaysia, I'm from Malaysia. A lot of decisions basically come from Kuala Lumpur. right? Because Kuala Lumpur does the central power of the city, and then majority of the business activity also happen in Kuala Lumpur too. And I'm sure the same thing can be said in Indonesia too. The power is actually being centralized right now in Java, and or maybe in Surabaya, or maybe in Medan, and so on and so forth. So in other words, in the context of organization, country, or even the world that we are living in, a very few countries are deciding the policies or driving the initiative towards shaping out what should be the financial architecture of the world. So even though G20 may not be a so-called a legal structure, however, the voice of G20 is actually very powerful. And why I'm saying this, because the fact that Indonesia is one of the member countries of G20, so the voice of Indonesia will carry, quite a influence, especially with this presidency, to champion issues which is related to our part of the world. Okay, because you probably know that only Indonesia is actually representing ASEAN countries. Also, of course, we have China, India, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, so on and so forth. Is more of a representation of a big power in Asia. But when it comes to ASEAN, Indonesia is actually representing about 700 million people populations. And you probably know that ASEAN is actually the third largest economic bloc in the world, if you take into consideration as far as GDP is concerned, and the population is young, and so on and so forth. Okay, so next one, please. Next slide, please. Okay, there's a lag from one slide to another slide. Okay, can we move on to next one slide, please? Committee, organizing committee. Okay, all right. I'm not sure what happened, but this is not the wordings that I sent. Okay, all right. So maybe something happened when the file may be okay, but anyway, doesn't matter. Let me refer to mine. Okay, all right. So post financial crisis, I mentioned just now, in 1999 they all came together after Asian financial crisis. They all came together and tried to see how they can actually design a system that reflect a better architecture of the financial world. And as I said before, why they want to do this is that because these are the most powerful economy in the world, and for them a stability in the financial ecosystem is really required so that they can actually facilitate trade, because they produce 80% of the world GDP. So having a financial system that does not create a systemic shock is, I think, very important, right? Okay, all right. So that is the first thing, all right? So the other thing is that, they also want to develop rules that, too big to fail issues. So this is again what I'm trying to say here is that, you don't want to create a system where, when one country fail or one banking sector fail, and eventually, affect the entire world. So if these 20 countries fail, you probably understand that, the effect will be felt by another 190 over countries. But actually it's not 20 countries, because one of it is basically European Union. So actually you're talking about top 19 and also European Union as well. So you do not want the systemic risk to be felt by others. Having said that, in 2008, we saw the problems, when America, the subprime mortgage, and the slowdown in Europe and fell by European Union, and then you probably know that many European countries failed, like Greece, Italy, Spain, and so on and so forth. So despite the fact that there's a lot of effort been taken in terms of creating like more stable and resilient financial system, but again, this is one of the biggest criticism of G20 as well, because a lot of policies seems to be favor them and not really taking into consideration the impact on the rest of the world. So this is where I think Indonesia comes in and said, what are the policies that should be driven not only to the developed countries, but also more focusing as well in the developing countries. because without a stronger voice from our part of the world, then our so-called policies and our way of doing things, so on and so forth, will not be championed at a much higher level. All right. I think the other things that what G20 wants to achieve is that, it's trying to formalize the economy, trying to bring into the mainstream policies as well, trying to minimize the role of a shadow banking system. I think this is becoming even more important after the 2008 financial crisis, because higher regulation and much more robust ecosystem for banking system to work, so that we will create a better and more resilient economic system. And to be honest, despite all the criticism, we can probably say that they have achieved quite a lot, because now if you look at the top 5 crises in the world, banking crisis or even financial crisis may be less relevant as compared to when we talk about climate risk, inclusion, and so on and so forth. So one way or another, we probably have learned a bit more in terms of how to avoid, mega financial crisis, even though we had few in 99, 2008, so on and so forth. But despite that challenges, we also now facing much more bigger challenges as far as the climate is concerned, technology is concerned, and most important thing, inequality is concerned. The post-pandemic, you probably know that, and in fact, if you read the latest report by Human Development, United Nations Human Development Report, majority of the countries today in the world are having worse performance in terms of human development as compared to before the pandemic. So even though G20 were able to were focusing more on financial crisis in the past, or stability of the economic policy in the past, but post-pandemic, I think the role of G20 would be much, much more different, because we realize that, the systemic risk will not just come from the banking sector, but the systemic risk can also come from, we call it a health crisis. It can also come from climate crisis. It can also come from technological risk as well. All right. And then obviously they also play other roles and so on and so forth. Okay. So can we move on? Okay. All right. So now, after talking about G20 a brief breakdown about what you probably know about G20. So now let us move on about what Indonesia is trying to do. Okay. So Indonesia came out with a very interesting term. All right. Recover together, recover stronger. So why this theme is actually becoming very important? So now the question is that we do not want to have an economic policy which is polarized. We do not want to create the world which is actually quite polarized. So when you talk about polarization of the world, is that now we are developing on a crisis as far the East against the West. So the East is mainly dominated by Chinese and the Russians, and the West, you're talking about the domination of the European Union and also the America. All right. So that is another big issue that we need to talk about. So this risk is becoming even more and more, I would say, pertinent over the last 2-3 years, especially after post-pandemic as well. So what is the implication of this risk? The implication of this risk is that, more global geopolitical tension will lead to many other things. For example, it will lead to energy crisis. Second, it will lead to food crisis. All right. And then it will lead to other impacts as well. So people always say, when father and mothers are fighting, the one who's going to pay the price will be the children. So the child have to pay the price, if there's any less harmonies in home, right, or any infighting at home. So this is the kind of analogy that actually I can look at. Give you in the context of what's exactly happening today in the world. So because the big boys are having some tension, some dispute and so on and so forth, so who's actually paying the price? So the Russian and Ukraine war, for instance, if you take it for example, are creating huge amount of disruption when it comes to food security in Africa and also in Middle East as well. So the poor countries are struggling to import basic foods. All right. So when we talk about recover together, recover stronger, what we are trying to say here is that the pandemic have exposed the weakness of what we talk about, the current ecosystem. All right. So this is where I'm talking about, as much as we are putting effort in terms of creating much more resilient financial system, but moving together, all right, Indonesian vision is that we also have to create a much more resilient system holistically. All right. So that is what we call as recover together and also recover stronger. And to create much more resilient, you can't basically focusing on G20 per se. The voice of other smaller nations should also be taken into consideration. If you really take that into consideration, then all this geopolitical tension, will be able to be mitigated or will be managed much more efficiently as compared to what exactly is happening right now. So as you probably know that Indonesia, I'm not sure about Indonesia. I've been there recently, but maybe you know better about the food prices, about how much you got to pay, is the wage is going up, and so on and so forth. So all these issues are actually contributing to many things. Number one, if energies are not handled properly, we are not able to solve energy crisis, and people will still go back to cheaper energy like coal, which actually going to contribute more to carbon emission and eventually will also contribute furthermore to the climate risk. So the whole thing is actually like a spin-off, and one will actually lead to the others. And then it's just like a vicious cycle, and then it's going to continue remain within the system, and another 10 years is going to provide a lot more challenges as compared to solutions. Of course, Indonesia is fighting more in terms of restructuring the global health architecture. And why this is so important? This is so important simply because the pandemic have shown us that a country that become, so-called, example or epitomize, the success of handling pandemic, have what we call as a robust and resilient health system. So without that, you probably see that a lot more people are dying, and a lot more people are not able to get fundamental treatment. And after pandemic, things gonna get worse because a lot of people are actually suffering from long COVID, and they probably need more and more treatment. So when you talk about restructuring healthcare, what you are talking about? We are talking about accessibility. That means we must allow people to get access to good healthcare, and we also have to make healthcare more affordable. I think that is more important. So this is not, we are not just talking about our part of the world, but we are also talking about, America, which is healthcare is much more expensive. People are not able to get, good, services for reasonable price unless they have medical insurance and so on and so forth. And third, which is the most important thing, is that the future pandemic will require global coordination. All right. So we can't basically live alone and try to solve this problem, because we need to jointly develop vaccine. We need to jointly develop antibiotic, for example. So it requires global coordinations. And these global coordination are much more important for our part of the world, because you probably know that majority of the people who are living in our part of the world are not able to have access to good healthcare because it's not affordable. All right. They may want to go to the government healthcare, but government healthcare will not have the capacity to deal with another major pandemic, and which is have shown during the COVID-19 as well. A lot of people seems to be forgotten about what COVID was all about. Apparently life is back to normal. Even in Qatar, we are not wearing masks anymore. So everything is just like, we're going back to normal, shaking hands, talking and so on and so forth. But we fail to understand that COVID. Okay. All right. Okay, let me continue. Okay, advertisement. All right. Okay. All right. And as I said, the most important thing what Indonesia should voice out is that the concept of inclusiveness. All right. Although this G20 is representing, the big boys who actually contribute 80% of the world GDP, but without creating opportunity for the other 20%. It's very hard for us to experience another round of economic prosperity. So we keep talking about how important the big boys are, but we forget to highlight the importance of the small players. I think that's very important, because this is where the next growth is going to come in. Of course, within G20, you have India, you got China, even you got Indonesia, where you got Mexico, you got even Saudi Arabia, where there are a lot of potential growth rate going to come in because of a high level of, middle income and also poor people and young people as well. But these countries have to play a much more bigger role as compared to what they are doing right now. Right? For example, if you take Indonesia, we are expecting much more greater leadership within ASEAN. I think that's very important because our policies are still fragmented. We can actually do more in terms of support smaller nations like Brunei, like Cambodia, like Laos, and so on and so forth. I know Indonesia has not reached a level where it can play big investment, driving technology, because it's still in the form of recipients. But as a big country and very powerful country in this part of the world, a policy should be driven that create regional economic prosperity. I think that is very important, right? You see, maybe I can be honest here. One of the biggest failures of a big power, just like America, for example, they were not able to drive regional prosperity, right? Of course, you can say Canada is doing well, but once you go further south, you go to Mexico, and then you go to Honduras, and then you go to El Salvador, and so on and so forth. Of course, it's not really a responsibility of America to ensure that this country become quite strong when it comes to economic policy. But without having a stable regional policy, you will probably face greater consequences in the future. So what America is facing right now, huge migration from Mexico, Honduras, El Salvador, and from all these Caribbean countries are migrating to America for better opportunity. So this is what happened when your policies are not inclusive. All right, you solve a temporary problem, but you will create huge amount of problem in the future. So G20 is not just about driving policies which going to promote trade, which is a great thing. The world is driven by free economy, trade liberalization, and so on and so forth. But economic policies should also be driving common prosperity. And that common prosperity, I think, is very, very important. Okay, that's the point of what Indonesia is doing right now, and more is required. That's why you guys, as the young people who are listening to me and also Professor Aisan after this, when you grow up later on, when you start becoming a graduate and you start working, and you feel you must have this sense of responsibility that it's not only I'm responsible for my family, myself, and also my community, but because you are from Indonesia, you must also have sense of responsibility that I'm also being responsible for regional economic prosperity. So you have to show leadership. I think that is even more important. So leadership in the Muslim world are exactly lacking. So some of you may want to step up and say, I want to show leadership. And to show leadership, you need to have knowledge and understanding about how the global scenario works. So this is where my point coming in about political scenario in the Muslim world. So another things about G20 is that we have 3 Muslim countries. We have Turkey. I think Professor Aisan is from Turkey, so he has more understanding about what the role of Turkey would be. In fact, Turkey happened to be the president of this G20 in year 2015. And then we have Saudi Arabia, which is representation of a country from Middle East or GCC, very rich, all rich. And we are from Qatar. We probably know that energy crisis is no joke. It's not a problem here. We can still buy fuel at a very cheap price. We don't worry about air condition because we get air condition all the time. So whatever problem that people are facing in Europe, they said energy poverty. In Europe they have energy poverty. You're talking about Europe, one of the most powerful continent in the world. But in this part of the world, in GCC, we don't even have the context of the problem of energy crisis. So the reason I'm trying to tell you is this, is that there are so many advantages in the Muslim world. We have energy resources. We have huge amount of population, especially Indonesia. We have close to almost 300 million people, and most of them are young, also in GCCs. But just having all these advantages are not sufficient. All right. So we need to translate these advantages into policies that are going to drive economic prosperity in the Muslim world. All right. And being part of G20 will actually carry the voice and also the issues in the Muslim world. I think for me is much more important, because if you look at the situation in the Muslim world today, except for several countries, there are many countries that are facing political crisis And that political crisis, not because, the political structure of the Muslim world, because the political structure of the Muslim world has remained the same for many, many years. But mainly, if you ask me, of not giving enough opportunity for people. You go to a country like Egypt, you have high inflation, like Tunisia also, you have high inflation. You know why? Because they have a food security problem and they have also energy crisis problem as well. And that translates into what we call as a high inflation problem. So these fundamental problems are leading to political uprising in the context of, opportunities are concerned. There's not enough job that being created in the Muslim world. So all these things have to be discussed in the context of inclusiveness, and leaderships are very important, because without driving proper policies, we will not be able to make any substantial changes. And that policies, and the reason I keep on talking about this is that because those policies coming from us as an educated person, from you as a Mahasiswa, or as a student who listen today and then say, maybe I should be doing more with my life, I should study hard, I should basically go and do PhD, maybe in Ivy League, or maybe in Oxford or Cambridge, or in top institution, maybe in HBKU one day, and then start understanding about what policies is all about, and driving those, because the world is actually being created about and from policies. Bretton Woods is policies, IMF is actually policies, World Bank is actually policies, United Nations are actually all driving policies, sustainabilities are policies, technological disruption are actually policies, inclusive are actually policies. So without having understanding about how to drive policies, we will not able to shape what we call as the market direction in the future. Next one, please. I'm almost done. All right. So the other thing I really want to talk about today is that, especially when we are Muslims, and we need to understand is that, one thing that differentiates us with the others is that it's not just about finance. G20 always talk about finance, and now they are moving towards sustainability, because they have messed up the world so much, everywhere, either we have less water in one place or we have a lot more water in the other place. Some of you are laughing and smiling, but when you are living in places where you are prone to flooding, it's no joke. You just take Pakistan, for example. 1/3 of the country is actually underwater, and who are suffering? The poor people, and some people even had haven't ate for 3 days because they don't get any support from the government. The aid cannot reach the people because they are living in the rural areas, so on and so forth. So the world has moved from finance, and now it moves to sustainability. All right, of course, they talk about governance, so on and so forth. But for me, the next important thing is that what we call as a morality and ethics. I think this is the most important thing. So the value of spirituality, or what we call as Islamic values, should be the core or the forefront of our policies. In the past, we used to, I'm from Malaysia, so we had better leadership in the past, and we always compare, there are two Muslim countries in ASEAN, Malaysia and Indonesia. Of course, we have Brunei, but Brunei is just too small. So we always say, Malaysia is doing better. Indonesia got problem because of the corruptions and everything, right? Now things have changed. People are saying Indonesians are doing better because the leaders are better. Malaysia got problem because, there are a lot of corruption issues in Malaysia as well. So the point that I'm trying to make here is that morality is actually far more important when it comes to economic prosperity, right? So good leaders must have integrity, must have spiritual values, must have a good values in such a way that the leaders must feel that, the responsibility of a leadership, not for him or for his family, but the responsibility of the leadership is actually for the people and for the country, and more importantly for common economic prosperity. So that's what Islam is all about. That's what common prosperity is all about. We are trying to take away the suffering, the pain, and by giving opportunity, not by feeding you, not by providing you just zakat and so on and so forth, but more importantly, we are giving you opportunity. So the reason I'm giving this talk today, even though it's 5 o'clock in the morning here, we have to wake up so early. But of course, Fajar is also early, but still talking in the morning is not really something that you really look forward, right? Wake up in the morning and give lecture. So, but still, I think we want to do this because, we are talking to almost 383 people. And at least we are hoping that 1 or 2 of you will grow up one day and become a strong leader and with morality and also an ethic. So we have to really go back to the fundamental of Islam and try to really understand that leadership are so crucial in terms of driving policies, and G20 really provide that platform for Indonesia to drive the leadership. And you cannot drive leadership if you're not better than the others. You cannot ask America to listen to you, just because you are from Indonesia. You have to make America listen to you because your idea is better, your idea is stronger, and you have a proof of concept. For example, you talk about inclusiveness. So you must have a proof of concept. You must tell the America, say, you come to Jawa or you come to Surabaya and look at how we have actually promote inclusiveness, how we actually shape our economic prosperity. Look at how our economy is being structured. So if I can just tell you one story and then I move on. So this is basically coming from my new dean. So he was telling me this story that he said, his friend said, will Japanese accept Islam or not, or will accept Muslim or not? So then he said, no. His friend said that it's very difficult for Japanese to accept Islam. For what reason is that? Because Japanese people are very practical. So the practically means that they look at the Muslim world, they say it's poor, disorderly, no proper structure, people cannot even eat, and so on and so forth. And this is what is being portrayed to media. So the Japanese people say, why I should accept a religion that can't even manage their own people. So this is what we need. You want to talk about inclusiveness, you need a proof of concept. You want to talk about recovery in the healthcare, you need a proof of concept. And that proof of concept is actually driven by better policies and also better leadership. Can we move on now? I'm almost done here. Next one, please. Okay, so the last thing I want to talk about, there are two more main points that I want to talk about is that when you talk about policies, when you talk about leadership, so on and so forth, right, we need to move from market failure to market shaping, all right? Every crisis that you've seen today, Asian financial crisis, global financial crisis, global pandemic crisis, so on and so forth, is actually pointing out the weakness in the market. It shows that market alone cannot function as much that as we wanted it to be, all right? As much that we believe in the free economy, at the same time, we realize that free economy cannot solve all the problems, all right? So you see a lot of side effect of the free economy, which is not really a side effect, but becoming the main harm of the whole ecosystem. So I mentioned 3 points for you to remember. Number 1 is the technological disruptions. Number 2 is the climate disruptions. And number 3 is basically the inequality disruptions, all right? And these are not just a side effect. Side effect means that, it's just like an allergy, 2-3 days, you will recover. But this is remaining in the system for a very long time. And this is a profound and a persistent problem. So we cannot just allow the economy to correct itself anymore, all right? So we need to shape the market. So this shaping the market is what we talk about, driving new policies, all right? So this shaping the market means that we need a proof of concept. All right, and Indonesia maybe can provide some proof of concept when it comes to Sharia economy or inclusive economy, all right? Because you got 330 million people, most of them are young, some of them are living in a rural area. So how you make them inclusive, how you make them robust, how you make them more resilient, how you make them having all the fundamental aspects of life, how you make them, have opportunity for social mobility, how you have them ensure them they have access to education. So these are all important ideas that need to be discussed at the universities level. For your assignment, you need to really read a lot of things to understand how these things can be done, and we can move forward as a society rather than as individual. Okay, it's important to drive your individual incentive, but one thing that differentiates us than the other people or the conventional system is that we are not only driving our individual needs, but we have to align our individual needs with our religious need and also society needs. So shaping a new world order should be driven more along community development or more holistic development as compared to individual development. That's what I'm talking about market shaping. Next one, please. Okay. So this is just some of the market failures, negative externalities, so on and so forth that I already talked about, and we need to really address these issues rather than using it as a side effect. But this is basically what we need to basically ensure, that the side effects are not become the main effects, but we have to drive the policy so that we can address all these things. All right, next one, please. So quickly, all right, so just a picture to tell you, and I've used this picture so many times. It's important that we start with finance, because finance and economics is the core. And now we are not just addressing financial system, sustainability, and also morality, which I talk about the three triangle, which is very crucial. So this is where I think Islamic finance can play a huge role as far as driving these policies are concerned. So don't underestimate the power of Islamic finance. It's not just about Sharia, it's not just about being compliant, but Islamic finance is just beyond that. Okay, I'm not trying to promote everyone to study Islamic finance, even though I'm a passionate of Islamic finance. I'm sure Prof. Aisan the same. That's why we are in the Islamic finance program. But we have so much to do as far as driving the new architecture is concerned. Because if you design finance properly, so finance will become powerful. But if you design finance not in the right way, finance can also become very destructive. So you have a good finance and also the bad finance. What we are saying is that policy should be driven by good finance. Next one, please. Okay, so this is things that I took from Indonesian presentation. This is exactly a presentation from my colleague from Indonesia. They talk about how powerful I think Islamic framework is for shared prosperity. As you can see, Islamic prosperity is talk about four things: governance and leadership. We talk about institutional framework. It's very important that you design strong institutions, and more importantly, the most important thing is about financial and social inclusions. So this is what Indonesia should be really looking at in terms of creating a proof of concept. So when I say proof of concept, means you create a solution and you tell the whole world that we can actually do better than the others, and let the whole world come to you and learn about your policies. All right, and that's something that you need to do. And the last thing is what? Resharing, driving entrepreneurship, driving social entrepreneurship, or even common normal entrepreneurship by using more resharing contracts as compared to just increasing debt, because debt is also another big problem in this world. Can we move on? Okay, all right. So this is coming from you. As you can probably see that this is, I'm not saying that Indonesia should be doing this, because Indonesia is already doing this. This is the proof of concept that coming from Indonesia. The reason I'm telling you this is that because as a student in Indonesia, all right, you need to basically take this opportunity of driving this. One is Sharia economic empowerment, Islamic finance deepening, and research and education and Sharia economy as the three pillars in terms of the driving new economic policy. So you all should be excited because Sharia economy and Islamic finance is really being part of the whole ecosystem. So yeah. Next one, please. Ada yang bawa motor lagi. Okay, next one, please. Alright. Okay. Alright. So let me just tell you one thing before I end my presentation, and I always give this example as a concluding remark. Malaysia was very poor back then when we first got independence. So we used to send people to Pakistan to learn about their economic policy, because Pakistan was much more advanced compared to Malaysia in the 70s. All right, they had a lot more development, machine technology, and so on and so forth. All right, and then Korea came to Malaysia to learn about our economic policy. South Korea, some of you are very crazy about Korean drama, K-pop, and all those things. All right, so South Korea used to come to Malaysia and learn about our economic policy. So we learn from Pakistan, South Korea learn from us. All right. But today, South Korea is here, Malaysia is here, Pakistan is here. Okay. So the point I'm trying to make here is that within 40 years or 50 years, okay, you can probably see a shift in the global, domination, because, some countries decided to adopt right policies and some countries decided to adopt not so good policies. All right. Maybe all the policies are good, but the people who are driving the policies are not probably ethical or having high value of morality, honesty, sincerity, and so on and so forth. And Allah said in the Quran many times that victory is only being given to small people, but who are honest and sincere and driving it for the sake of the pleasure of Allah Ta'ala. All right. So we cannot get success, if you're just pursuing our own interests. We will only get success if you are pursuing the interest for the right reason. Okay. So with that, I think this kind of event is very important. Is very to share knowledge, for you to be inspired, to be motivated, so that you will study harder. You're going to read more economics book, you're going to read more finance book, so that you understand things much more. And then in your life, inshallah, you'll be able to do something much more meaningful, not just for you and for your family, but more importantly for the society and also for the country and for the Islamic Ummah as well. So with that, thank you so much. Assalamualaikum.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. For those who, first of all, I would like to say thank you, Dr. Muhammad, for an informative and entertaining presentation on the introduction of the G20 and the overview of how the G20 has gave significant impact to Indonesia in recovering from financial crisis during the pandemic by creating a more resilient system and taking into account the voice of other nations in creating global coordination to create good healthcare. And if I may quote from his presentation, in order for the young generation to participate in the G20 presidency, we must have a sense of responsibility for regional economic prosperity by showing leadership skill and showing Islamic value. We must also make other countries to listen to us because we have better ideas, and driving policy by Islamic finance is one of the key to success the G20 presidency. Once again, thank you, Dr. Muhammad Iskandar, for the amazing presentation. And before we move on to the next session, for the question and answer session, we will have it at the end of the second presentation by Dr. Ahmed Farouk Aisan. So please wait, everyone, for the session. Thank you. Please keep your question, but you can post it in the chat box. You can still post it in the chat box. Now, we will move on to the second session. It is the presentation by Dr. Ahmed Farouk Aisan. Good morning, Dr. Ahmed. Are you there? How are you?
Good morning. Thank you. Thank you very much, Nejma, Dr. Iskandar, all the participants. Great to be in this webinar.
All right. Please, before we begin the presentation, please allow me to read your CV. Thank you.
Sure.
All right. So this is Dr. Ahmed Farouk Aisan Sifi. He is a professor at Habekau and the program coordinator of the PhD and MSc programs. He has been the board member and monetary policy committee member of the Central Bank of the Republic of Turkey and served as a consultant at various institutions such as the World Bank, the Central Bank of the Republic of Turkey, and Oxford Analytica. Dr. Aisan, who has many articles published in academic journals, is recipient of the Bogazici University Awards and the MEEA IBM Ibn Khaldun Prize. And Dr. Aisan is also a research associate at the University College London Center for Blockchain Technologies. I think That's all. Now, without further ado, I would like to welcome the second speaker. Dr. Ahmed Farouk Aysan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nejma. Thank you for the introduction. So let me start with my experience with G20. Probably it will be giving a personal story of mine, and probably it will inspire somewhat the younger generation that most of the participants today are probably will be the future leaders, inshallah, and will be dealing more with the G20 issues from Indonesia, and at the global level, they will have policy impact, inshallah. My experience with G20 has started more than 10 years ago. I was a professor at Boğaziçi University, and at the same time, by the way, is it possible for me to share my screen? That will be much better because I added some things. So, and please remove the presentation right now and let me allow later. I don't want the presentation right now. So it started about more than 10 years now. I was a professor at that time at Boğaziçi University, and I was a consultant also for the central bank. My initial consultancy was more on financial markets, on credit card. But the Turkey has started having some roles in G20. And it is quite related with the background of the G20, because G20 has been established towards the late 1990s. But at that time, it was mostly at the ministerial level. The finance ministers used to come together and they discuss some of the more technical issues somewhat. And even many of us do not know much about the G20 because it was just the ministerial level, very bureaucratic meetings. And when it comes to getting into some sort of policy recommendations, we see very limited impact of G20 up to 2008 crisis. And actually, even the establishment of G20 is quite interesting. For example, Canada is mainly leading the process because the main concern for the developed countries like Canada, I mean, it is next to US, and it is quite difficult for Canada, for example, to establish a different global policy setup as opposed to US. So they wanted to diversify the policy making globally. They have an incentive because they want to be in the global arena in the policy making. But if they say, okay, we want to get in, it will not be justified. So they said it is better to have something like G20 instead of G7 or G8, such that they will have some more role. So that's why in the early years, the Canada was quite instrumental in pushing the idea of G20, and they started again with the ministerial level meetings. And it was not that important at that time because we all know, even now, I mean, at the end of the day, still the G7, G8 sort of meetings go on. But thanks to 2008 crisis, actually, G20 become quite popular. And you know, in the 2008 crisis, some of you might be even was just born at around that time, even, or you were quite little by that time. But we remember those days by a very big crisis. You know, people even compare it with the Great Depression of 1930s. And we were expecting that there might be another Great Depression globally. But it didn't take place. Thanks to the central banks, thanks even more to the global coordination. And certainly G20 played a very big role in alleviating the impact of the global financial crisis. So how it happened, there was already G20 ministerial level meetings, I guess during the IMF World Bank meetings. You know, IMF and World Bank has annual meetings twice in a year. One is mostly in September, and other one September, October. These are called fall meetings, and the spring meetings. So global financial system players, the banks, central bankers, the finance ministers, they all come together, mostly in Washington, D.C., but also in every 2-3 years, IMF World Bank meetings are held by some other countries. I remember Indonesia had one recently, 3-4 years ago, I guess. The IMF World Bank meetings were in Indonesia. Turkey has done it in 2000s or so. So these are given to different countries to host. But oftentimes, especially the fall meetings are quite important. They take major decisions. Anyways, and they were having G20 meetings during IMF World Bank meetings, but it was at the ministerial level again. But the 2008 crisis came up. Remember, probably this Lehman Brothers collapse in September, and the impact of the crisis was mostly, the initial impact was on September, October. So there was a good coincidence that IMF World Bank meeting was taking place. And at that time, the son Bush, the president of US at that time, came to the ministerial level meeting and pushed the agenda. So it was a big impact. I mean, imagine that the US does not even care sometimes to attend this sort of meetings, given the size and the hegemonic power of the country. But imagine that US went into the meeting and represented by the president. But what was the reason? The reason was with the 2008 crisis, there was a need for global policy coordination. So imagine the US is very fearful of Great Depression, and because it was the major crisis for US. The 1/3 of their GDP has been lost. The unemployment rate has risen up to almost 25% for an extended period of time in US back in 1930s. So they were fearful of having similar crisis. And still, in spite of all this global coordination, you might remember that 2008 crisis led to double-digit unemployment numbers. It led to extended period of uncertainty. And even right now, actually, even after COVID-19 with the recessionary concerns right now, we are somewhat experiencing the repercussions of 2008 crisis. Because after 2008 crisis, we have low inflation environment, low interest rate, and we were, even there's new monetary theories came up, and they said, okay, there is no inflation, we can print more money and give it to the poor. But at the end, as you see recently in the last 1 year or so, especially, it is not working. I mean, but all those inflationary concerns right now globally and the recessionary concerns are somewhat linked with the 2008 crisis. So it was a really big crisis for sure. So that's why they had to have a policy coordination. And they all know that it will not be enough to have only G7 countries or G8 countries, because this is a trend, especially after 1980s and especially even more after 2000s. Developing countries are even occupying higher share in the division of labor. There is more globalization, and they are taking more share in the GDP, led by China for sure, but also Indonesia is one of the biggest country in that, getting more share from this pie. Turkey is so, India. So there are developing countries. They are growing faster than the developed countries. And in terms of their share in the global economy, they are occupying even more share, like Brazil, for example. Again, I mean, it is a population close or more than 300 million people. It's a large country, same thing for Indonesia, same thing for India, Turkey. So these countries had to be incorporated into the global financial system, because it was the period that the global economy needs even more coordination. So it started in 2008, and you remember there was Pittsburgh meeting, other meetings. So initial impact of G20 was immense, because it was kind of a reshaping the global financial architecture. There was a hope, initially even more hope, that developing countries will play a much bigger role in the global financial structure, infrastructure, and they will voice it. It happened somewhat. How it happened, especially this IMF quota redistribution, was one of the achievements of G20, for example. In the past, even now, I mean, the developed countries are more represented in global institutions like IMF, like even United Nations, for sure, we all know, the World Bank. But they wanted to change this a bit. At least they wanted to give some incentives to developing countries to coordinate during 2008 crisis. Because 2008 crisis was also different in the sense that it was coming from US. It was mainly affecting developed countries even more than the developing countries. Many of the developing countries, even though they have been affected by the global crisis of 2008, they were relatively in a better shape than the developed countries. So they had to give something. So that's why they start giving more shares in the IMF, and this means that more voting power. And even it was at the expense of the US losing some kind of a vetoing power at the IMF, because US used to have more than 25% of the votes or shares in the IMF. And some of the very big agenda items passed with the at least 75% votes. So in a sense, in practice, US has the power. This is quite expectable, by the way. Imagine these institutions are the Bretton Woods institutions, and it was just established after the Second World War. And for sure, the main winner of the war was the US. So it was this institutions have been shaped by US, even in North Carolina, you know. So that's why they had that sort of a 75% vote. But after this 2008 crisis, US has agreed to give up some of its shares and to be distributed to developing countries. And it passed even much later at the Obama administration. I mean, it is not that easy to pass this because the parliament says to approve, and it took some time. But finally, US has done it. But in that sense, it is a major thing. US start accepting that developing countries should have more power in the global financial infrastructure, and certainly IMF is one of the channels. And the developing countries start putting more agenda items in G20, because when you become a president of the G20 in that year, you have the somewhat of an capability to determine the agenda. It doesn't mean that you completely determine your own agenda, but at least you can have more influence. For example, Islamic finance is one of them. Dr. Iskender has also mentioned. For example, Turkey has done a similar sort of agenda setting back in 2015 when Turkey was having the G20 presidency. At that time, I was at the Central Bank. I was a board member and the Monetary Policy Committee member of the Turkish Central Bank. And we tried to incorporate some agenda items. Among those agenda items one of them was the Islamic finance. We organized one big event, and also it has been continued in the following years as G20 presidencies move to other countries. So at least in terms of awareness about the Islamic finance, in terms of putting certain agenda items which will last for at least for a couple of years, being a G20 president in that year helps. Because, by the way, I mean, many of the agenda items are not resolved. I will show in a bit. Is not resolved in 1 year. It is there are working groups, and then they discuss for several years, and at the end they come up with the very simple solutions sometimes, but they are very influential. Why they are very influential? Because all the countries, one way or another, start accepting them through IMF, through World Bank, through Financial Stability Board, through BIS. So they have quite an instrumental role. I will come to that point in a bit, but certainly being a part of G20 helps for developing countries, and especially for Muslim countries. I mean, there are only 3 countries in G20, Turkey, Indonesia, and Saudi Arabia, and they should probably even coordinate more to set the agenda. Coming to this agenda point again, Dr. Iskender has also mentioned the importance of Islamic finance. I will approach the same issue as well. Oftentimes in our countries, in developing countries, we are concerned with our internal issues, domestic issues. There is always an assumption, which is kind of a learned assumption, that the developing countries do not have much role in affecting the global agenda, which is very much correct, because we all know that in the global issues, oftentimes developing countries are the policy takers rather than the policy makers. But the G20 gives them at least a chance to shape or to contribute to this global agenda. In the past, they were completely ignored, we all know, but at least there are working groups. It doesn't mean that one country as being the president of the G20 will change the world. We all know that this is not possible. I mean, this is not realistic. But at least people are more involved. People coordinate more. I mean, the countries coordinate more. There is more awareness. I mean, even this event, for example, organized by your friends, it's great because, I mean, it increases the awareness. Probably 20 years from now, some of you guys will be central bank governor of Bank Indonesia, of your countries. You will be the finance ministers, inshallah, and then you will remember some of the agenda items. You will know how to handle certain issues. It is not just by force, but by convincing the other parties, by giving some concessions and getting some other concessions, because this is how the international diplomatic system works. I mean, you give something and in return you get something. And that's why G20 meetings, I believe, are quite important. For example, this year, I'm sure it will be even more interesting. You know, US has pressured Indonesia not to accept Russia to the G20 meetings, but certainly the Indonesia didn't accept this because it will lead to certain bigger problems later on. So probably this year in December, November, the finance ministers of G20 countries will come together. Probably other finance ministers, some of the other finance ministers will not talk with the finance minister of Russia. But we never know. Probably when the leaders come together, they will have some agreements about the wheat corridor. They will have some agreements with the energy. So G20, or the Indonesia is hosting a G20 in a period that probably we need even more international coordination and dialogue. And it could be a scene that we might observe more of alleviation of some risks coming from the Russia-Ukraine conflict. So sometimes also this G20 meetings, even though they have lots of working groups, lots of internal agenda, but global leaders have to come together, and they don't have too many occasions for this. They have, you know, each and every year they come together in United Nations in New York. And there are some other events like COP26 and so on, but G20 is the main platform. At least we all know that once in a year, the global leaders come together. And if there is something important they have to resolve, they resolve. They try to resolve in that meeting. So I believe Indonesia's G20 presidency of 2022 will be remembered in that sense as well. It will be in the textbooks later on in international politics, in the international relations. So let me continue with my slides. I don't like to go with the slides anyway, but because these are the most of the items you can find in the webpage of G20. I believe it is very well prepared. So it will be, again, I mean, it will be better if I can share my screen. That will be much more efficient if possible. Our friends, if you give me the kind of a permission to share my screen, it will be better. Yes. So is it possible? Anyone responsible? Because I will skip some of the slides, so it will be much better if I can control my slides. So anyone there listening, having the authority? Even this one requires coordination, as you see. Yes, guys. Anyone there allowing me to share my screen? Najma, do you know? Sorry, can you reply, sir? Signal is unstable. Okay. Could you allow me to share my screen, please?
Yes. I'm contacting.
If you make me host or something, it will be easier, probably.
I'm currently contacting the committee, so
yeah.
Wait a moment. Sorry for the inconvenience.
The slides are moving, but I pretty much give the general idea, but I want to show some of the slides just to save time. Dr. Iskandar has also mentioned about the important points. I don't want to be repetitive on this. So it will be great if I can share my screen and we'll move on. Or let me read it from my slides anyway, as I wish, without showing it to you, and probably they will follow. First of all, I mean, the webpage is great for the G20, and this the motto of having recover together idea is quite good. Recover together, recover stronger. I was in Indonesia, in Semarang recently. It was in the airports, in everywhere. So I also like the idea of engaging the people into G20 process. By the way, this is another success of G20 countries, which they try to incorporate their populations about the global agenda, which all of a sudden even students, professors, they start engaging with the G20 agenda. This is, I believe, another success story. And mashallah, the Bank Indonesia, the finance ministry of Indonesia is doing great, as the power of Indonesia is increasing, especially in the last 20 years, with the economic stability and with the right economic policies. The priority issues are global health architecture, no wonder because of the COVID-19, digital transformation, and sustainable energy. These are somewhat generic topics also, but the generic but very important topics, because everybody is discussing these issues. And I don't expect that there will be very concrete, very definitive answers, because these are the topics also that you cannot come up with an easy solution just in 1 year term. But the good thing is that, you know, in G20 presidency, there are working groups. There are two parts. One is through the Sherpas. Sherpas are mainly the bureaucrats from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Okay, thank you for allowing me. I guess you now see my screen, right? Yes, and you see my screen, right? Okay. These are the main issues, and global health architecture, as usual. After COVID-19 crisis, we realized better that the global policy coordination is needed, because there could be global epidemic, and we might have more recurrent of of epidemics. And that was the idea again. If you remember the 2008 crisis, there is a need for global coordination to save the globe from the economic crisis. And the same thing for COVID-19. It was a health crisis, but it turned into a kind of a financial crisis as well. Even we are living the consequences of this COVID-19 crisis with the recessionary concern, with the inflationary concern. So there is an agenda on the health architecture, which I relatively know less. But certainly, for example, digital transformation. This is at the agenda of the many countries, especially on fintech, how we can increase growth through emphasizing the digital transformation. Again, this is kind of a structural change. And I don't expect that the countries will decide, okay, we will tax the big tech companies and we'll give it to the poorer countries. I don't expect something like that to take place, but at least some of the regulatory issues about the global fintech regulation will be discussed. There are working groups on this, especially led by the central banks and the finance ministries. But it is a good topic, again, to be discussed under the urgency of this topic. At least it is in the agenda. Digital inclusion, especially, it might be very timely for Indonesia as well, because Indonesia has a very big population, and Indonesia is quite good in fintech issues because the size of the country is quite permissible for such fintech innovations. But there are lots of other issues related with how to regulate these fintech companies, what are the requirements, how to put some international coordination also, how much we should allow the big tech companies, how much data they are getting from us, and so on. These are all going to be discussed. So and also sustainable energy transformation, which is also became even more popular. I mean, it was on the agenda for the last 10, 15 years, at least, even more. but now it is getting into agenda of the more of the countries, and the G20 didn't stay silent on this. With the Ukraine and Russia issue also, it became even much more important. I mean, it's not just about the sustainability, but even the energy security issues become more important. So I will not get into detail, but I like you to look at the structure, how the G20 works. I mean, there is a finance track in all the G20 meetings, and there is a Sherpa tracks. For the Sherpa tracks, Sherpas are mainly represented by the foreign ministers of the countries, and they have lots of working groups. Again, I mean, even they work on education, employment, women, tourism, development working group, for example, is one of the oldest one, how to give more growth. It has been established in 2008, 2010 because of the global financial crisis, how to increase the growth with the development concerns, with the sustainable development concern, let's say. It goes back to 2010. Tourism working group, for example, has been established in 2020, again, with the concerns with COVID-19 and so on. Energy transition working group, environment and climate sustainability working group, G20 trade investment and industry working group, all those working groups. For example, think about these working groups as not just established for that year. Throughout the year, the finance ministers, the relevant ministers, like for example, for the agriculture working group, the agriculture ministers come together and they try to resolve some global coordination requiring issues, or they bring the awareness about certain issues. And the countries prepare for these working groups. They have to provide some documentation. And that was one of my experience actually back in after 2008 crisis. At that time, there was one finance group on the financial resilience, and the Turkey was contributing to that. And at the central bank, I was giving consultancy to them. I was part of the working group in that sense. So the good thing is that at the background, there are lots of people working. So they are, in a sense, start preparing the initial documentation and the agreements. And then later on, if they get into an agreement, it is approved by the presidents, by the presidential meetings, the last meeting, and it becomes enacted. Again, as Dr. Iskandar has mentioned, the G20 doesn't have any legal entity at all. But given that all these major countries come together, when they give directives to IMF, World Bank, or some international organizations, or they adopt certain policies, all the other countries follow them. One recent example is this global taxation, right? It was mainly led by Germany because they believe that, which is correct anyway, the multinational companies are tax evading. They are putting their headquarters in certain tax-free regions and they are not paying tax. But if all the countries collectively decide on a tax rate of 15%, then they will not escape from their home countries, especially from developed countries, and they will go to tax-having countries. So this has been very much adopted by developing countries. Everybody agrees that, okay, those companies should pay more, so we will increase minimum corporate tax to 15%, then this will be applicable in all countries. But my point is that actually these working groups are quite important. Don't just look at the presidential meetings. I mean, some of the working group decision right now will be probably effective 2-3 years from now, but they will be very well prepared. We oftentimes think about the G20 at the governmental level, but the G20 is not just about the governments. There is civil society 20, think tanks 20, women 20, labor 20, urban 20. The most important thing for you probably, there's also youth 20 that you might involve. These are relatively less structured, but the very similar issues are discussed among the youth 20 events. Unfortunately, this sort of events are relatively loose because these are like non-governmental agencies, one way or another. I mean, they just come once in a year or so. Only Business 20 from the very beginning was relatively more influential because the business people anyway come together in the Davos meetings, other meetings, but this is even somewhat different. At least they are more inclusive. in the Davos meetings. Probably it is even the bigger companies, more influential business people. But at least as far as I observe, in the G20 terms, the business 20 represent even the SMEs, even a larger portion of the business society. It was also one of the agenda of Turkey, by the way, in 2015, how to improve the financing structure of the SMEs, small and medium enterprises, how to incorporate them into global financial system. And back in 2015, we had an Academy 20 initiative, which is somewhat resembling size 20, which is still lacking. I believe academics, not just from the G20 countries, but globally, should discuss the agenda of G20 official agenda, because right now, by the way, all this labor 20, women 20, they come up with their own agenda, which is, I believe, wrong. Instead, I mean, they can still discuss their own agenda, but they become irrelevant. It happened to be that they are the G20 countries, and they discuss some of the issues, but it doesn't come into forefront in affecting the policy making. I believe they should discuss more of the existing agenda of G20, and they contribute from the labor perspective, from the business perspective, from the women perspective, from the youth perspective. That will be much more effective. That's why back in 2015, with a group of friends, we came up with the idea of Academy 20. Academy 20 will be representing not just the G20 countries representatives, but they will, because Academy is more global anyway. So it will be represented by the academics, but the academics will discuss the issues which in the agenda of the G20 official meeting. So they will contribute, they will act like an NGO by raising their voice, because the governments always may not have the chance, or anyway, this is the international diplomacy. Sometimes they don't even raise certain issues because they get some concessions from other parties, or they know that they don't raise certain issues because they cannot solve it immediately. But in Academy 20, we aim to bring the issues that are not raised by the governments, because the academy will be freer in raising the certain issues. We had several meetings, but later on, it requires some funding and so on. And inshallah, in the future, we might even put it more into practice. The finance track, the main thing in the finance track is the coordination. I can share my slides later, but their main motivation and the main agenda is the 6 items, which I will not repeat. And there are these working groups. Again, you can find them in the webpage. What I like in the Indonesian G20 presidency, these are from the webpage of G20 presidency. These are what are the priorities. These are not a coincidence. I encourage our younger friends to look at these initiatives. For example, strengthening debt management and transparency. I mean, this is kind of the agenda items that we discussed, they say, or strengthening health system capacity in the pandemic prevention. It gives you an idea of what they discuss, because not all the events are shared. And also, G20 has achieved a lot, I mean, historically. For example, they handled the 2008 crisis, 2009 global economic crisis, COVID-19 pandemic, and they took certain initiative further, and then they put this into their webpage. International financial architecture, especially after 2008 crisis, that the G20 have a big success. International trade coordination during the Saudi Arabian presidency, they tried to also reform World Trade Organization, infrastructure development. International tax issue, especially in the German with the G20 presidents of Germany. So these are really important achievements. But still, the last one, strengthening global partnership, is still there. There needs to be even more on this. They try to incorporate Africa, especially because Africa is relatively less represented. Only South Africa is represented in G20, as far as I know. So they are trying to also even incorporate some of the more developing countries. So let me stop here for the interest of time. Thank you very much for giving me such an opportunity. Over to you, Nejma. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ahmed, for the informative and interesting presentation on the insight of how the G20 Indonesia works by the Sherpa tracks and highlighting the importance of Islamic finance in contributing to the G20 presidency, and as well as explaining the priority issues that exist within the G20 presidency.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mary.
Now, everyone, all right, ladies and gentlemen, and all participants, now we have come to the questions and answer session, which I think a lot of participants are very interested in this session because I saw several questions in the chat box. And for those of you who would like to ask questions, you may raise your hand or type in the chat box. And all right, so there are two questions that I will yield to Dr. Ahmed and as well as Dr. Iskandar. Now, I saw Franz Sinaga. Would you like to open your mic and floor your questions?
All right. Thank you so much. Good morning, Mr. Dr. Iskandar and Dr. Ahmed. I have each keynote speakers. I have two questions for Mr. Iskandar. Actually, sir, I agree with you that government policy or stakeholder must based on moral and ethics. And my question is, first, how to apply the Sharia economy in government policy to achieve SDGs and sustainability, prosperity that can driven welfare for citizens. And the second one, how the concept of Sharia economy can build a market share in ASEAN or regional can be driven and share its benefit to human life. And for Mr. Ahmed, Dr. Ahmed, what do you think, sir, about the Western policy intervene in G20 Presidium, which over about the blue economy and green economy to the members of G20s? Is it can be in line with Islamic finance or Sharia economy? And the second one, how the Islamic finance can see the chance to be fundraising on digital transformation, global health architecture, and sustainable energy transformation to driven inclusive prosperity distribution on mankind. I think that's enough, sir. Thank you so much for your explanation.
Thank you, Franz Sinaga, Sir Franz Sinaga, for your questions. Dr. Ahmed, you could give the answer.
Thank you. Thank you very much for my questions. First of all, Islamic finance is also relatively a new field. I mean, it has been around. I mean, certainly if you want to go back earlier, there is history of Islamic economic thought, and you can go even earlier. Even in conventional economics, you can go even earlier years than Adam Smith. But actually, Islamic finance is taking place in the last 40 years with the institutions. But the 40 years is nothing. I mean, especially in the last, I mean, you know, from Indonesia, I mean, there are new Islamic banks came up especially in the last 10 years. There is now even a consolidation, the merger and acquisitions are taking place. This is the same in other countries. I mean, still there are discussions how to make the Islamic finance in a more Islamic manner. In all countries, Pakistan is trying to completely Islamize the financial sector, same in other countries and so on. I believe, first of all, that's why this is not a kind of a field which is very much structured. And at the end, anyway, the Islamic finance came up to find solutions for the global economy, because we always say that Islamic finance is not just for the Muslims. It provides solutions for all people in the world. So in that sense, Islamic finance could be at the agenda of the G20, and this sustainable finance, blue finance, and so on, they're all related with Islamic finance. And our overall approach is anything good, anything ethical will be in Islamic finance anyway. But unfortunately, also that's another dimension which is quite related with the G20. Islamic finance people initially started with a global mission. It has kind of a nationalistic vision as well, because I mean, imagine in Pakistan, in Malaysia, it is kind of an identity building mechanism. But still, there was a global mission. Okay, Islam will come, Islamic finance will come, and the global inequality will decline. There will be more justice and so on. We tend to emphasize these dimensions less over the last 10, 20 years probably, because the Muslim countries are relatively less effective in the global agenda setting. I believe COVID-19, I believe global financial crisis, I believe even the G20 presidency of Indonesia should bring or should awaken the Islamic finance people to deal with more with the global issues. Because the issue right now, Islamic finance professionals, Islamic finance regulators, academics, they think that they cannot change the global issues anyway, and they start dealing with the more micro issues, micro Islamic finance, social Islamic finance, but anything that develop should be at the global level. And this COVID-19 crisis provides us such an opportunity because it is a pandemic, and Islamic finance people, Islamic people with the worldview can provide solutions not just for Muslim, for the but for the rest of the world, because this is a global issue and it is not just the problems of the Muslims. So we wrote an article recently, for example, emphasizing that the Islamic finance shouldn't be just dealing with the very micro issues, but instead should be dealing with the more global issues. These global issues doesn't have to be just on sustainability. It could be on income inequality. It could be on the minimum wage or some kind of a minimum wage that everybody should earn, or even it should be about how to prevent certain disasters, global disasters, or how to mitigate when the disasters took place, like in Pakistan right now. But certainly, I do agree that the Islamic finance should be focusing more on the global issues, and we have the self-confidence to say something to the rest of the world, because the global agenda is mainly set by the developed countries for sure, but inshallah with the think tanks, with the involvement of the developing countries like Indonesia, like Turkey, like the Saudi Arabia in G20, so we will be more part of this global discussions, inshallah. And regarding to the second point, this is somewhat related actually. For sure, I mean, it is not just this digital transformation is not just happening in the conventional banking. It is because one way or other, Islamic finance is affected by the overall structural change, and this digital transformation seems to be more of a structural change. So Islamic finance people are also responding. I believe this is quite helpful for Islamic finance, because in Islamic finance, in addition to the conventional finance, we have certain more restrictions, and those restrictions could be handled better with the digital transformation, because it will be more cost efficient. We will be able to have more tailored solutions for individual customers with Islamic orientation. So this is for sure is being very much discussed in Islamic finance. There are new articles, new discussion points are coming out. But there are still more to work for sure. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ahmed, for your insightful explanation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ahmed, for the explicit answers. Now, for those who would, Dr. Iskandar, would you like to add the answer?
Yeah, because I think just quickly, briefly answer to his two questions that Mr. What is his name? Franz Sinaga. Okay, thank you so much for the questions. So first one, you asked how to apply the Sharia economy in the government policies. I mean, this is just my opinion. One thing that differentiates Sharia economy as compared to conventional economy. So conventional economy always concerned about wealth creations and also wealth preservations. One thing that really differentiates Sharia economy is that we focus also on wealth distribution. In fact, wealth distribution is also becoming much more important when it comes to Sharia economy. So today, if you really want to talk about Sharia economy, and you really need to learn as well why sustainability is also becoming very popular. So like what Dr. Aisan have said, before this discussion about Islamic economy, more on justice, more on equality, so on and so forth. But it's very difficult to, practice very abstract ideas because justice can mean many different things and many different forms as well. Right? But why sustainability becoming more easier to follow is that because they just come up with the pillars, they come up with initiative, they come up with how to measure, and so on and so forth. So, and we also have our framework like Maqasid Sharia and those things. So the scholars in the past have discussed about these all worldview conceptual ideas. And now the current generations, or people like in my age, the current scholars and people that come from later on, should really take out some of these ideas and turn into what we call as the practicality notions, which means that you push these ideas. And these ideas should not be just built on accumulation and preservation, but also should be focusing more on distribution, but more on structured distribution. Today, we are still talking about how we should design zakat institution, how we should basically design wakaf institution, for example. So we have to go beyond that and try to institutionalize it. Okay. And the second question that you asked is that how the concept of Sharia economy can build market share in ASEAN and so on. Okay. I always believe that when you are trying to drive any policies, you have to focus on three things. Number one, you focus on regulation. Number two, you focus on institutions. And then the third one, you focus on actually the human development. So these are the three things that you want to focus on. So if you really want to drive Sharia economy in ASEAN, or even like what Dr. Aisan have said, getting into context of global discussions and everything, so you really need to really look at some of the regulations that can beyond, that they can make this idea beyond regional and try to globalize it, those ideas as well. So the only way for you to do that is to make your ideas relevant. So not only you have to get into the conversation, but more importantly, your idea should be relevant. And more importantly of all, or the top of it all, is that your idea is actually better. Okay. So today we are struggling because our ideas, theoretically may be good, when we bring in the Quran and Hadith and everything, it looks very exciting when you are citing all these holy books, so on and so forth. But it still remains very abstract, and it still remains impractical in certain way. So this is where the transition should happen between the big ideas and into the practicality as well. And practicality means that you solve the world problems. Okay, and that is very important. So you talk about food security. So how do we solve food security? Do you talk about energy crisis? So how do we talk about energy crisis? Accessibility to healthcare. So how do we solve it, for example? So if your ideas use Sharia economy can actually address these issues, then people will actually take it seriously. People will start reading your article. People will start basically take on notions much more, I would say, seriously. So that will probably my answer to your questions. Yeah. Okay, ada jawapan tambahan daripada belakang. Okay, go on. Okay, alright. Okay, that's all.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Iskandar. Yeah, you want to add more explanation again, Doctor?
No, I'm okay. I'm okay because I think there are some other questions as well. So it's better to give opportunity for others to ask questions. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Iskandar, for your explanation. Okay.
Yeah, we are lecturers, so someone said that we are like a talking machine, so we can talk forever. But yeah, but enough. Yeah, let others ask questions. Yeah.
Thank you, Sir Francinaga and Dr. Iskandar and Dr. Ahmed for the interactive question and answer session. Now, I would like to floor questions to yield the time to those who would like to ask questions. You may raise your hand. And please keep in mind those who raises their hand will be put first because we are aiming for an interactive webinar. But if there are no one who raises their hands, I will read the questions in the chat box. All right, I don't think I see anyone raising their hands. So let me read the question. I think the question are chosen by the committee. So these are the question for Dr. Ahmed and Dr. Iskander. How to apply the Sharia economy and government policy to achieve SDGs and sustainability, prosperity that can driven welfare for citizens, and how the concept of Sharia economy can build market share in ASEAN or regional can be driven and shared its benefit to human life. This is this question has been answered.
I just answered. Yeah, I just
Yeah.
answered that question.
Sorry for the inconveniences. I think it's from Maulana. He asked, how should we millennials or students as agents of change be able to build competence for the long term in this economic sector in the industrial era 4.0 towards 5.0 and in facing the upcoming demographic bonus? And what are the challenges and effective strategies that we must do? And how do we build innovative and creative power through the development of critical thinking skills and economics? I will post the question in the chat box, so you may read.
No, we have it. We can read the questions on the chat.
Okay.
Okay, all right. I mean, I think both of us can answer, but let me just give you the quick overview and briefly, and then Prof. Aisan can add to it. Because when it comes to technology, fintech, I think he's probably much better suited to answer this. But quickly, what I'm trying to talk about the millennials. I just want to approach it from different perspective. In order for you to be relevant, you need to really understand the nature of the risk that we are facing. So I think I made it very clear from the beginning. There are three major risks that we are facing: the technological disruption, climate change, and also inequality. Okay. So the beauty is that the technology become powerful, the world is actually getting warmer, and the equality is actually getting wider. So the question is that how do we use technology with better economic policy to address climate change and also inequality issues? Right? So these are the solutions which is required. Right? So when you talk about inequality, we are not just talking about income inequality. We are also talking about the side effect of it, like energy crisis, food crisis, accessibility to healthcare, so on and so forth. So if you just want to build a more innovative and more robust economic system, you need to ensure that you understand the nature of the risk, and then you cascade down those nature of the risk into multiple pillars, like what I have said just now, and then you translate into initiative, and then whatever your entrepreneurial idea that you have, business solution that you have, you make it as a problem-based solution provider. Then you'll become more and more relevant. And obviously, this is not just a bottom-up approach. This should be also driven by policymakers. And they should provide a much more conducive and robust ecosystem so that this idea can actually flourish and the better ideas will always win. So this is what market competition is all about. Does not mean that you start a company, is relevant to climate change, you're going to be more successful. You have to understand that your idea should not be just be good idea, but also be a competitive idea and should be accepted by the market. So this has to be thought, a long thought process, but eventually it has to actually start somewhere. And last point is that the beauty about Indonesia is that because you have 300 million people, so your market itself is very big for you to test those ideas. So start small, local based, and eventually make it regional, and then eventually people will start taking your idea much more seriously. So I think when it comes to fintech and technology, I'll probably pass it to Prof. Aisan. Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I agree with Dr. Iskander. We have to be realistic also that the world will not be changed immediately, but at least you can make yourself ready. Inshallah, 10 years, 20 years from now, you will be more in policy making. You will be more in business. You will have even more influence. You can even raise your concerns through the Youth 20 even in this years. But first, we should know what is going on. And this sort of webinars probably help in that direction, because we don't just learn by reading. We also attend other events, which might help us 10 years, 20 years from now. I remember, for example, when I was a university student, there was a Habitat meeting. It was a United Nations meeting. It was about urban issues, the population issues. And I attended some of those meetings as a university student. And I didn't have any power to influence, but at least I know how this I start knowing about how these international events are taking place, what sort of people are coming and whom to listen to. Later on, it helped me. I mean, it doesn't mean that you will have a very drastic change in your life, but at least it is good to be part of this global agenda. And even more importantly, right now, I mean, we discussed this G20 meetings, but these are intergovernmental meeting. Right now, for the millennials, probably it is not just about the governmental meetings. Right now, people on Twitter, in Telegrams, there's a different agenda for the millennials. For example, last year there was a GameStop issue that GameStop issue that the small people or small younger generation organized themselves in Reddit, and they made a global impact. Some of the hedge fund companies have bankrupted for that reason. Apparently, with this digitalization also kind of provide the checks and balances role for the bigger corporations, even for governments. Look at this, all those cryptocurrency sort of discussions. And in that sense, the millennials, younger generations, are closer to this technology. They know better about it. And they organize better digitally without having any boundaries. So this is another area that the youngers might have more role. And it seems to be working. I mean, one way or another, it doesn't mean that they are completely changing the world, like a very reformist idea. But there are some instances like GameStop that they show that the hedge funds cannot rule the world. They can organize with small fishes, and then they can even eat the big fish or show that the big fishes are not alone. So in that sense, it is good to follow these global discussions, be good to be part of it. And some of the global issues are not something that we resolve very easily. And as youngsters, you guys wanted to solve certain things very quickly, probably, as being the part of the nature of being young. But at least I believe that even the awareness at this stage will be helping, because we may not solve all the problems, but at least you will be prepared for the next 10 years, 20 years, and you can solve some of the micro issues. At least you can show that you are around, you can make a difference for certain issues. I believe GameStop issue was a good, or the GameStop example was a very good example from the last year. So you can still be part of the global agenda by organizing in the digital sphere. Thank you.
Thank you for the insightful explanation and answers. Is there anything that you would like to add again to the question, to the answer of the question, or that is enough for this question?
It is enough for me. Thank you.
Okay. I think this will probably be the last question. And I think the question is really relatable to Indonesia's economic conditions right now. So one of the participants asked, her name is Udmi Saida. What do you think about Indonesia's economic conditions related to the increase in fuel prices? And how is the economic and financial condition of Indonesia? And what will be the condition of society if the increase in fuel oil continues? And what do you think we can do as students about it? Thank you.
Very quickly, even though I was in Indonesia for about 2 weeks ago, I'm not that familiar, but overall, certainly there are some subsidies for oil, and which keeps the oil prices relatively lower, and it contains the inflation. But overall, there is a global inflationary concern. It's not just specific to Indonesia. First of all, I should say this. And also, in spite of all these global shocks, I really appreciate what the Bank of Indonesia has done, what the finance minister has done. The inflation rate is about 3.8 or 4%, or right now with this increase in the oil price by 5%. But when you look at the UK, it is double-digit numbers. In US, the inflation rate is like 9%. One way or another, the developing countries will be affected by the central bank decisions of raising the interest rates. But what is important in here is at least to contain the international spillovers to the local economy. And I believe there's a very good work done in the last 20 years in Indonesia. Inflation is very much tamed. There is growth, which lacking in many countries. And there seems to be very stable approach into the economy. We have less of business or the political business cycles, let's say. These things will happen. I don't think that the young will have anything to do with it because it's a global shock, which oil prices have increased, and one way or other it will be reflected in the economy. For sure, there could be some distributive impacts in the economy. But it is also quite difficult to subsidize oil when there is global prices. There's a hike in the global prices. Inshallah, Indonesia will handle without getting into detail because I don't know that much of detail anyway. Thank you.
Amen. Thank you, Dr. Ahmed. Dr. Iskandar, you would like to add?
Just quickly to add to the discussion, because Indonesia is our neighbor, right? So our problem seems to be quite similar as well. We have oil, so that's a good thing. So the government revenue goes up whenever oil price goes up, but at the same time, the subsidy also goes up. So now the question of a trade-off, do you use the extra revenue to continue with the subsidy, or do you use the extra revenue for further infrastructure? And there's also students that ask, how do we prepare ourselves and so on and so forth. So I think there are three things that we need to take into consideration when it comes to driving economic policies in the future. Number one, first you have to consider all the disruptions that are taking place. I think I have highlighted that. But a lot of people feel that they are powerless. But then, like what Dr. Aisan have said, the disruption also have created a lot of opportunity. For example, social media disruption, that also have created opportunity. So it gives you power. Digital disruption, for example, also have empowered the marginalized, the youth, and so on and so forth. You can invest, you can get into financial system, for example, and you can create a localized solution through fintech and so on. So there are two things that are happening. So disruption has basically created more power for technological-based company. At the same time, we also have created opportunity. So why am I saying this? So in order for us to address, for example, the subsidy problem and creating much more sustainable economy, so we need to think about how to move away from this trade-off between furthering the subsidy and also sacrificing infrastructure to more towards adjusting our lifestyle. So these are some of the new ideas that are coming in. For example, community living, working and having a home and also all the amenities within a 10-kilometer radius. And you don't really need a car because you can just use an electric scooter, for example. So all these ideas might look a bit weird right now. How come we live without a car? But in the future, this disruption will also shape our lifestyle in the future. All right. And even now, I see people are wearing suit, wearing a very tie and so on and so forth, are taking electric scooter to office, right? So maybe not in Qatar because it's very hot, but in other parts of the world, it's already happening. And your generation are much more brave enough to embrace disruption. So the point that I'm trying to make here is that we cannot continue doing the same, this trade-off between subsidy and infrastructure, right? We need to think about much more long-term sustainable solutions. And that requires some kind of disruption in our lifestyle. And that disruption is facilitated with the invention of technology and social media and so on and so forth. So look everything from a positive aspect rather than just looking at the negative perspective. Social media has created so much of disruption in a negative way, but at the same time, you can transform this negative energy to much more positive outcome. So that one, I would probably say that, how we can actually create a sustainable solution when it comes to, the subsidy policy. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Iskandar and Dr. Ahmed, for the answers from different perspectives. It was really, really amazing to know the answers from different perspectives. And I think that is it for the question and answer session. Thank you for the answers once again. Dr. Ahmed and Dr. Iskandar, and thank you for the questions for the participants who asked the questions. And ladies and gentlemen, we have finally come to the end of the part of the webinar, and I would like to remind that the committee that have confirmed to me that there is a reward for those who ask the best question. So just wait, and maybe you guys will be one of the one who won the reward. And I would like, before I give back the floor to MC, I would like to say thank you again for the speakers for the amazing presentation. I'm so glad that I am acting as the moderator in today's webinar. And thank you again for the speakers for the informative and interesting presentation, and to audience for active participation, and the committee for having me as a moderator for today's webinar. And hopefully this webinar will be beneficial and impactful for everyone. And thank you for your attention, and I will give the floor back to MC.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to Mrs. Najma Malia for being the moderator of this international webinar. And we also thank the speakers and participants who were spared. Hopefully, what you have learned today will give you a lot of knowledge. As the MC, I'm personally asking for apology if there are words that are not pleasing. I represent the entire committee, would say thank you and see you again. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you once again, Dr. Hamid
Thank
and
you.
Dr. Iskandar. Thank you
Assalamualaikum.
so much. Have a very good day.
So much.
You too. Inshallah. Salam.
Hi guys, for the session link will be delivered as soon as possible. So kalian tunggu aja. Waiting for that, okay? And the link will be delivered at the chat room, even in Zoom or in YouTube stream. Wait for the link has been delivered, so you can check in the chat room below. And please to everyone to on the camera because there's a photo section. Once again, please on your camera because there's a section photo.
Yang nanya link absensi ya, link absensi ada di grup chat Zoom ya. Ayo di dan satset karena waktunya absensi cuma 15 menit dari sekarang.
Siap,
Jangan nerima link apapun dari orang ya, takutnya nanti ada link phishing kayak kemarin. Jadi pakai link yang sudah disiapkan oleh panitia. Oke, kita foto dulu ya. Ayo di on cam yuk. Yang pakai background Zoom atau enggak, silakan on cam aja.
Oke, kita hitung ya teman-teman ya. Bisa gaya secantik mungkin dan setampan mungkin. Yuk, 1, 2, 3. Sekali lagi yuk. 1, 2, 3. Sekali lagi, oke. Sekali lagi, oke. 1, 2, 3.
Tungguin, bro. Tungguin gua belum pot.
Asal instansi dari siapa, Kak?
Tadi yang nanya untuk pemenang door prize, nanti pemenangnya akan disampaikan di grup, jadi jangan leave dulu, nanti pasti bakal diumumin sama kakak-kakak panitia semua.
Siap.
Terima kasih.
Ya udah.
Kita semua.
Siapa tadi yang manggil? Halo.
Aku, Kak, manggil, Kak.
Apa?
Asal instansi di siapa, Kak?
Apa?
Asal instansi.
Instansi diisi UINSA aja, UINSA.
Kita semua menolak BBM dinaikkan.
Oke, Kak.
Yang instansi itu kalau emang anak UINSA terus anak UINSA, terus kalau yang bukan dari UINSA, dari kampus mana, itu kalian tulis itu. Kalau enggak tulis dari region kalian, asal-asal kota kalian, kalau emang bukan dari UINSA. Oke, bisa dipahami semuanya?
Ya.
Makasih Kak. Ya, terima kasih kembali.
Tolong tidak nge-vape, Mas. Hargai privasi.
Mohon maaf, tak tinggal mandi.
Woi.
Siapa yang nge-vape, woi? Iya, aku
Jam piro, Bi?
Watus, kawan kami menengok.
J Mas. Jam piro?
Oke, yang sudah absen silakan keluar dari Zoom. Diperbolehkan. Terima kasih teman-teman semuanya yang sudah menghadiri acara webinar nasional. Kurang lebihnya mohon maaf. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam. Terima kasih kakak.
Terima
kasih kakak. Terima kasih kakak.
Terima kasih kami ucapkan. Kau udah itu apa sih kau udah?
Besok demo besok.
Bekasi Pontianak. Terima kasih banyak.
Berjo Kak.